Right now, you are living through the birth and rapid evolution of a new kind of intelligence, AI.
Rival tech luminaries who have already reshaped our world are in an arms race. Recent polls suggest 70 to 90% of all CEOs plan to invest heavily in AI behind them.
The numbers are staggering, amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars in the next few years. Governments and regulators are stepping in as well, setting the stage for a global paradigm shift.
But have you stopped to understand what AI really is? Are you prepared for a world where AI will impact your job, your health, your relationships, and maybe even the nature of your humanity?
I'm Charlie Stack.
I am Lax Srinivasan. We believe your success, our success, depends on us starting to have a different set of conversations about AI.
Join us as we get to know our new neighbor. Welcome to the machine. ChatGPT and large language models. When people talk about AI in the year 2024, this is mostly what they are talking about. The hype makes sense. Large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, only represent a small fraction of the AI landscape, but they get all the credit for bringing AI into our everyday lives. But what are LLMs? How do they work? And where should you expect to see them pop up in your everyday life? Today, we're talking with Barak Turovsky, who is the head of product for Google AI at a time when language-focused AI was really beginning to take off. During his time there, Google pioneered the use of neural machine translation, which powered early versions of Google Translate. And by 2017, his teams were using transformer model technology. This is what powers ChatGPT to start to change the game in terms of language-focused AI. Today, he leads AI at Cisco. One of the things I love about Barak is he's not just a Googler. He's worked in defense, he's worked in telco, e-commerce, retail, and he is really great at thinking practically about these technologies he's been using almost a decade before most of the rest of the world was aware that they existed. Barak, welcome to the machine.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for a very nice introduction.
So before we dive in, tell us, how did you end up finding yourself in the position of doing some of this foundational work around generative AI, like before OpenAI even existed?
Yeah, I mean, my fun / semi-cynical way to introduce myself is that I work on those quote-unquote esoteric topics, as you call them, large language models and generative AI, almost 10 years before they became the hottest thing on Earth. But on a more serious note, I was, as you mentioned, I have a background also in machine learning even before AI, but I was also has a background in commerce and payments, and I was a product lead on one of the Google teams in commerce side. And at Google, the things that happen is that when you have a reputation of a strong product lead or whatever, people poach you. So engineering leader for Google Translate reached out to me and said, we're looking for a product lead for Google Translate. That was before AI, it was all machine learning at that time, what we call machine learning 1.2. And I was relatively skeptical because I'm like, well, a lot of people, and he said, you have a lot of mobile experience because I was kind of pioneering mobile commerce and mobile payments work with PayPal. He said, we need someone with mobile experience. I'm like, look, this is Google, everybody has mobile experience. What's so unusual here? And I'm like, look, I'm not a linguist, I'm not a translator, like how exactly I'm related to the thing. And he had explained to me, but the one thing that he told me is that at that time it was still big number. He told me about the usage of 500 million users. And frankly, the app was pretty basic. It was how he positioned it was a research team with some UI. And he said, that's why we want to bring it up to next level. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's pretty amazing product. We should be, if we just focus on, on bringing new experiences and reaching out to new markets and new users, we should be in 1 billion club of Google products, which is, there is very few products in the world that are on 1 billion active users. And he was kind of skeptical. I told him we should take a goal within 3 years, we should hit 1 billion monthly active users. And he was kind of skeptical. Then he even told me he considered not to hire me because I'm spinning too much and overselling. But eventually he told me, look, you were one of my best hires in my life. But long story short, after 2.5 years, I joined in early 2014. And within 2 years, we hit 2.5 years, not 3 years, we hit 1 billion users. And within 4 years, we hit almost 2 billion users. So we quadrupled the user base. Some of it thanks to products, some of it thanks to, that was a coincidence, that we basically were the first team that productized at scale, as you mentioned, what at that time was called deep neural networks, what you called neural machine translations. That's a prerequisite to LLMs. At that time, it was 7 billion parameters, which is now a small LLM. At that time, it was humongous. It forced, believe it or not, it forced Google to invest $130 million in R&D to develop our own hardware, what now called tensor processing unit, TPUs. TPUs was developed specifically for Google Translate because the serving, forget about costs that people are fixated. The performance was 100x slower than production to do it initially. So it was a ton of very pioneering work across research and product and engineering. And then, as we mentioned, the researchers that worked with us, they got together and say, oh, there's a better way to do translation, transformers. And they wrote this groundbreaking paper that if you read it, you will see they mostly talk about translation because that was the case, maybe the only case. And by the way, we always felt it will be transformational. There was a very good article, The Great AI Awakening, that was written in 2016 when we launched it, about the history of AI, etc. Highly recommended, still one of the best articles. But then we basically proceeded to productize transformers. The first productization of transformer, called BERT, bidirectional encoding based on transformer, was done at Google. Specifically was done for Google search to better understand intent. That was launched in 2018, I believe. It was one of the biggest jumps in quality in Google, like the biggest jump in search quality on Google side. Then we took it to Google Ads because, frankly, Google is a languages company. It's a language that matches between a query, between intent to advertising. And that's added tens of billions of dollars to Google revenue with better matching and targeting. And that's basically kind of the story how I spent 10 years at Google, then was a chief product and technology officer for a computer vision AI startup in the retail space. And now I'm VP of AI at Cisco.
Barak, that's a great background. So at what point did this model jump out of the translation domain, suddenly one day became sentient?
Yes, I'm not agreeing with the person, including the person at Google, that saying he became sentient.
I'm just joking. I'm just saying,
yes.
You're right. I mean, it started very narrow. It got really good in translation. You're right. I mean, that was kind of the real breakthrough there, the transformer.
Yes.
But then, is it just people dump more and more data and give more and more compute, and the models became, and one day, voila, suddenly it started making sense? Is that really accidental?
Yes, no, it's not accidental. To large extent, as I mentioned, one of the reasons we did this article, we basically had a reporter up for 6 months sitting under embargo when we launched Google Translate, because we knew this will unleash a huge innovation, huge revolution of AI, but we didn't know to what extent and where. If you think about it, Google was very meticulous and very thoughtful to invest 130 million R&D budget for a product. Let's face it, Translate is not monetizable product, right? It's free product. Like when we went to the board and board heard it, they're like, like what exactly is the business model there? And the model is Google is a languages company. Google always would find a way to monetize it. And as I said, we started with translation because it's an easy use case, very clear, very well-defined use case that you can start, everybody loves it. Then we basically use BERT, that was the first productization to basically improve search. Obviously, search is very well-monetized product, and then we took it to ads. So I think it was a very thoughtful process. We were not necessarily, I think what we did not realize, how it will go beyond obvious things for us. And that I think, to some extent, the Transformer paper, and to a large extent, OpenAI, mostly I would call this very clever user experience. What they did, they democratized access to this, right? I think that's a huge thing that happened. If you think about it, I consider myself extremely lucky that I was part of the two, let's call it hype cycles or like waves of AI. The first one, when we launched Google Translate, there was a short wave at that time. Everybody would talk about AI. But very quickly, it's kind of subsided because it's pretty obvious. It's very expensive. You need a very strong talent, and you don't have the use case to use it for, right? So it only was limited to companies like Google or Facebook or Microsoft, etc. What ChatGPT, in my opinion, did with their clever UI and I would call it also very different risk tolerance, because for Google or for Facebook, it was more or less impossible with all the hallucinations and all the stuff that happens with LLMs. I don't think company like Google or Facebook with all the scrutiny could do it. I think those two things basically opened it up, and people finally realized, oh my God, machines can create an output that is sometimes better than an average human or even very capable human. By the way, there's a lot of misconceptions about it too, and we'll talk about it. I think people don't fully understand what LLM can do and what it's limited on. But that created all this excitement, all this hype that people finally found a ton of use cases. Many of them, to be fair, another thing I would mention, I still think productizing is very hard. It's very easy to try. It's very easy to create demo and also get a lot of money invested in your company. But you're starting going into the details of productizing, it's still pretty expensive. It's a classical Pareto principle. 80% of the value comes from 20%, the last 20%, the last 10%, last mile. So we're still in the very early stages, but I think it's definitely Google a lot, but also OpenAI deserves a lot of credit of democratizing access and creating this excitement about generative AI, large language models.
Barak, we're gonna get to how this stuff gets used here with you for sure.
Yep.
I first want to just do a quick double click on what is this stuff? Because I think for most of the people listening, it's very easy. If my mom's listening, it's easy to get lost in discussions about neural networks and transformer models, and that this is the sort of TLDR, aspect of this technology, which becomes problematic because you do have to kind of understand mechanically how it works to an extent if you would like to crack the code of how you might use it and where the risks are associated with it.
Yep.
I've heard you say here that to some extent, back to the foundations of this in 2014 and 2017, really what you were learning is, let's call it a black box, but there are these sort of model types, right? Like new types of algorithms and hierarchies of algorithms, that were available, probably just theoretical up until a certain point because we didn't have the compute power.
Yep.
And then you were really working on how do we provide that compute power, right? So this is like the NVIDIA story for everybody who's been buying NVIDIA stock. You
Yes.
mentioned GPUs, right? This is
at that time GPUs couldn't provide it. We had to develop our own because GPUs were not able to provide it.
But but essentially, what why do we care about GPUs? I mean, it's just ability to perform more and more calculations in shorter periods of time.
Right. On two dimensions. One is training the model, but more importantly, if you want to scale it, it's actually serving the results. Both are very important, right?
That's right. So it's adding horsepower, right?
Yes, correct.
If I'm going to make it really simple.
Yes.
I mean, talk to us. What else is it important for the layperson to understand about ChatGPT or LLMs generally and how they work?
Yeah, great point. And I will try to use, since we have a lot of non-technical audience, I will in many cases like to use human behavior analogies because at the end of the day, it's neural. It tries to mimic human brain. So on a very basic level, what LLM is basically next word or next sentence predictor. If you think about it, in 2017, when we were announcing BERT, I was presenting a slide that basically showed what we're doing is a Mad Libs game. Literally that. You basically hide some words, train a model, and make them predict the next word. And that's basically what it is. And you can take it more advanced, predict next word, predict next sentence. That's what it does in translations. That's what it does in everything we do. One thing people need to understand, that's the goal, to predict the next word. And that's the potential limitations that people don't understand. The goal is to predict or to provide an answer, even if it's incorrect. And the most useful analogies that I find useful, especially people, investors, etc., the greatest analogy to human behavior, think about somebody who's extremely polished, confident, charismatic speaker, but their goal is to answer any question. If they don't know the answer, they will never tell you, I don't know. They will make stuff up on the spot. And because their delivery is so polished and so amazingly confident, you fall for it. especially on topics they don't understand. And people need to realize, and I will talk about those two dimensions in a second, because that's to me the biggest misconception of LLMs, and where people sometimes surprised. Oh, wow, why is the results are inaccurate? Why is giving me crap? That's why, because that's why how it's trained. It's not a it's still remarkably dumb, right? Because think about it, another good analogy is that that's why people fall and don't understand the difference. You don't have a lot of analogies in human behavior when somebody speaks like a very eloquent adult, but has the consciousness of a 7-year-old, meaning cannot differentiate between right or wrong, between accurate and not accurate. That's to some extent right analogy. So if you don't understand it, you basically in a big danger of falling for, if you're using human analogy, two scenarios. One is a con artist that basically talks about whatever you tell him, but they're basically telling you complete crap, and you lose money if you invest on them. Or it could be somebody who is like, I don't know, very successful entrepreneur, has his own reality distortion field that believes in his own crap. It doesn't mean it's accurate, but he just believes in it, right? And by the way, those two things, if you use maybe analogy of, I don't know, SBF and FTX, it's like, it doesn't matter whether he was a con artist or he believed in what he said. At the end of the day, people were, defrauded of a lot of money, right? So it's very important to understand that limitation and make sure people understand that very smooth talk doesn't mean high accuracy. Those are two different dimensions, and it's very important to evaluate the use case in this way.
I always find the analogy about consciousness versus articulation interesting, because my understanding as someone far less technical than you is that to say that it has the consciousness of a 7-year-old is even an overstatement, because it doesn't have consciousness. I mean, it's like, Lax and I always like laughing about, the muffin or chihuahua experiment, as it relates to, large language or transformer models, where, you will still have, no matter how many muffins or chihuahuas you use to train your algorithm, you'll still have some false positives, in the identification. But like my 3-year-old, could tell you, what's a muffin or a chihuahua with 100% accuracy, because they're not even remotely the same thing. Yes. But it's just because they have a fundamental understanding of what a muffin is or what a chihuahua is. And I think the way these things are built, it will never have that fundamental understanding of like what a thing is, because it's not how it's been built. It's just been built to predict correlation between two things. Yes,
again, it's like, I think there is a controversy on this front. Some people say that very soon we will achieve the general, overall general intelligence through artificial general intelligence. I generally believe it will pretty far away, based on my point. And just to clarify my point, you're making a very good distinction. What I was talking about is demonstration of fluency of a very eloquent adult and demonstration of consciousness, ability to differentiate between right answer or wrong answer of 5 or 7-year-old, because that's very dangerous. The reason it's dangerous is that in human behavior, we are not used to that. You don't have the situation, unless it's a person with a very rare, Down syndrome, that he's literally speaking like, amazing lawyer, but his consciousness, he doesn't fully understand what he's speaking about, or doesn't care, right? He could say complete lies, etc. Right. That's why it's very dangerous, because that's why con artists are so successful, because it's very rare human behavior, generally speaking. But it's very clear that people tend to believe it. The moment you believe the machine and you don't validate it, it's potentially very dangerous outcome. Depends on the use case, and we should at some point we'll talk about the use case, and I will kind of expand on it. I think this distinction between accuracy and fluency, meaning output that is very eloquent and polished, that's to me the crux of understanding that people need to get. It's not a technical understanding; it's understanding of limitation and how to apply what LLM is good at and what has limitations into use cases.
So Barak, I think it'll be a good segue into that, but just playing it back, I think what you're saying is it definitely kind of buyer beware. It has capabilities and abilities.
Yes.
But the human at this point I think as we all talked about, it predicts one word at a time. And I think there's a famous example of a lawyer in New York got in trouble with a judge
Yes.
because he said, hey, give me a case that looks like this.
Yeah, and he got it.
One word at a time, and voila, it actually created a case, except the case never existed. It took somebody with a consciousness, a human being, to actually read
to
it.
validate it. Yes.
It never happened. So I think that's the danger. So if I think it's a great way to kind of understand it now, if you bring it down to the real world, of business, we are all humans, with jobs. So what is kind of your way? How should someone think about this? That is looking at this.
Yeah. So I had obviously a heck of a experience when ChatGPT was launched, because literally every investor in the world wanted to talk to me and understand what the heck is going on. Is it disrupting Google? Is Google dead tomorrow because OpenAI will replace search? So I basically developed a framework from all this experience. And the good news, there are use cases where there's tremendous value that LLMs could bring. You just need to understand how to look at it. So my suggestion is to look at that on 2x2 dimension. One dimension, vertical dimension, is high fluency, low fluency, meaning what's the quality of output? The output could be presentation, it could be music, etc. And the second dimension, left to right, is high accuracy versus low accuracy. And as I said, the point I want to bring home is that the misconception or all this hype about LLMs, because people suddenly, thanks to OpenAI and transformers, discovered, oh my God, computers can create that type of output. People just couldn't believe it, but they conflate it with accuracy. They believe if it's highly fluent, it means accurate. Separate those two and look at them into two dimensions. And the key question I think you need to ask yourself is what's more important for the use case you're trying to solve? High fluency or high accuracy? Sometimes you need kind of both, but one is definitely more important than the other. Just to bring it home, in my visual on the left side, the green bubbles are the use cases that I roughly call them creativity use cases. What it means is that it's a use case where you're writing a greeting, you're writing a children's book, you're composing music, you're writing a science fiction book. You literally, there is no accuracy there. Accuracy is completely subjective. That's why it's a pretty good use case, amazing use case actually for generative AI, because he will create you amazing stories. Like I have a friend who asked to write an episode of Seinfeld. And my son, who is a big Seinfeld buff, said, oh my God, that's like, we should totally do. So it's literally the lack of accuracy is a feature, it's not a bug, right? So that's a great example. On the other dimension, you have situations that I call them decision/action support. Those are like on the right side, that's what I call red bubbles. And by the way, colors mean something. In a second, I will explain it. So those are use cases, for example, in search. You ask, what is the earnings calls of Google in the last 10 years? Because I want to make my investment decision based on that. Is this restaurant, what's the opening hours of this restaurant? Or I want to buy this dishwasher. Give me one recommendation of a dishwasher. Maybe explain me why, but one. Or I have a problem, my router is down, solve it for me. All these use cases are a critical decision action support. If you provide an answer that is incorrect, even with explanation, it's a useless product. Accuracy is the most important thing. Even if you need an explanation, it's still not enough. If explanation is great, but the accuracy is zero or low, that's a useless product.
Should we treat the patient for cancer or not?
Exactly right. This type of question, right? As opposed to the other way around of like, okay, give me a recommendation, and I will talk about it in a second. But back to the colors.
Barak, you're saying should this patient be treated for cancer, even if the answer is very poetic? I
will tell you, give me a draft summary of what's going on, but draft.
Yeah.
Right. I will talk about it in a second. So we're actually going to those use cases. I think those are the most exciting use cases that I'm also working on. So just to finish on colors. So red color to me means high stake use case, meaning if you screw up, if you provide incorrect answer, it's a very bad outcome. For example, people stop trusting search. The green is a low stake use cases. If you make a mistake, it's a feature maybe, but it's not a big deal, right? And there are a lot of yellow use cases that I call the mid-stake use cases. And those use cases, I believe it's actually a great starting point for LLMs. I call it workplace, or let's call it, I don't know, IT productivity use case. And let me give you examples. If you want to write a business memo email, and I emphasize the word draft, if you want to write a draft sales proposal, if you want to, as a developer, you want to get a draft of a code to run, if you want to talk to someone and create a draft or diagnose a technical support problem, all those are great use cases because you're still relying on users to validate accuracy. But the beauty of it, the division of work between machine and human is you machine responsible for frequency, give me a good story, give me a good draft, give me a good presentation, give me a good support script, give me a draft of a code. If you think about it, people in their area of expertise are usually very good with facts. Where they struggle, most of us, is to create a good story about it. It takes time and it takes effort. If you tell me that you save me 70% of my work to create a draft of a sales proposal, code, support call, etc., and you tell me in big flashing red letters, it might be incorrect, double check, you already created huge value, huge productivity boost. People most likely will not be opposed to double check and adjust as needed because, as I said, they already got a lot of value out of this product, right? Because you save them a ton of time researching, writing a good story, writing a good legal memo, etc., etc. That's why I actually like, I think Microsoft name of Copilot is great. It's, I mean, you literally start with a draft and you train the user, double check. It might be 80 to 90% correct, but double check.
I was going to say, this is sort of why a lot of the initial business cases that we're seeing are co-pilots.
Yep.
So that's exactly what you're describing.
Yes, and I will talk a little bit more about use case, my prediction of use cases that are all along those lines, but absolutely right.
But Barak, here's another question, just building on Charlie's point. There's a lot of co-pilots.
Yep.
Here's my personal experience,
yes.
as well as just talking to others, in different settings. I think one of my brother's analogies come to mind, which is a fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yes.
So I think the question is, you're saying, look, put it in big red, kind of flashing, check this. But if I'm operating in a domain that I don't know anything about, using ChatGPT could be dangerous, depending on. So it almost looks like, if I just follow that logic, Barak, what you're saying is you almost need to be somewhat, fluent in a field for you to even verify the output.
Absolutely. I think there is a huge misconception, and I am sorry. Let me give an example. Let's say in customer service space, which is, I think, one of the most promising fields. The big misconceptions that a lot of business leaders have, we can fire everyone. It's a new outsourcing field. We fire everyone in US, we'll hire a bunch of people in India, or we hire a machine, and that's exactly the same. Like, quality might go down a little bit, but it will be, 100x more savings. That's not the case at all. You need people with machines. You might need different skills. You might need less people. You might need, instead of 10 average customer support agents, you might need 2, but they're experts to validate or to deal with exceptions. You might need a data analyst or data scientist to clean the data to make sure the model evolves. It's not, let's replace all marketing, sales, customer support because you don't need them. I think that's the biggest misconception, and you're absolutely right. You nailed it. You need a person. Now, you can build more tools. You can build the tools that will double check all the links and all, etc. You could do that, but at the end of the day, you need somebody who understands probably more skills than the average person in that field to understand what's that. But you save them a manual work of researching. He needs to validate, but you save them a ton of work that most of people are not great into creating good RFP, good sales proposal, good code, etc. So that's, to me, the crux of it.
Another thing that I want to talk about here, because I really like, I think this, this paradigm makes it sort of easier to think. I mean, this is one of the real problems you identified is, okay, most of the world, billions and billions of us have played with ChatGPT, and it's cool. It's a fun tool to play with.
Yep.
But, figuring out conceptually how to create scaled, institutionalized business use cases out of it.
Yes.
Is, as you said, we're still in the early innings.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things I think of as a mental model is you talk about this like, mid-stakes workplace productivity set of use cases, is that I could identify in many of those cases a decision action support, a high stakes use case out of something related to it. So let's use our cancer diagnosis, example, since that's in my head right now.
Yes.
I could try to train a large language model that would just fully diagnose a patient having cancer or not based on clinical results that I fed into a machine. The problem with that use case is that I've sort of set it up to be really high stakes.
Absolutely.
If the mechanism of delivery at the end of it is that I'm expecting it to say patient has cancer or doesn't have cancer, and here's the treatment, and that I'm just going to go action on that, it now becomes a high stakes use case. Now,
yes.
There's a different version of basically that same thing where I have a doctor in the loop, and now I'm taking a ton of test results and, family history and scientific research that's been done, and I'm providing that doctor with a few recommendations that say, hey, it looks like this patient may have this type of cancer, and you'd probably be best served by focusing your attention first on, these three possibilities, so that the doctor's no longer walking in and having to scan through all the medical research on rare cancers and look at all the sheets and test results. You're just sort of pointing that person where to go. Your point is, I've made that doctor, this is a workplace productivity, I've made that doctor a lot more efficient.
Yes.
In terms of the work they do. I've probably helped make them more accurate because I've brought new sources of information to that. All of medical research, all of cancer research, no doctor has that in their brain, right? So I've maybe brought some stuff to the equation that they wouldn't have considered. Now I've set up the cancer use case using kind of the same technologies based on designing the use case differently. And I think that's an important thing for business people to think about.
Absolutely. I would actually add one more important addition to what you say. Everything you said is absolutely true, but I would say it's even more powerful when you add a mid-stake use case, which is very powerful. Hey, doctor needs to write a lot of after-visit summaries and a lot of things that they need to give to, etc. In addition to decision support, if you tell them, hey, I'm 90% correct. In those 90%, I'm giving you a summary that will take you 2 hours to read, 5 hours to research, 2 hours to write, and it will be 90% correct. I still want you to double check everything. Here is the links, etc. But think how much time I saved you, because your job, your process is not only to say cancer, not cancer. You need to do something about it. You need to write. You need to give it, you need to tell patients something. Sometimes you need to tell them you have cancer. By the way, that's by itself. I will talk about that in a second and give an example. That's a huge, in customer support or in customer interactions, that's a huge deal that you know how to talk to people in different situations. I'll just mention that I think it's very important distinction. There was recently Stanford research about the impact of LLMs on super entry-level customer support. And what they found, productivity gains were not that big, 15%. Customer satisfaction jumped like crazy, and the reason is most of the gains in productivity were on new agents that are not trained or not great agents. And the reason is, and you're talking about highly non-creative fields, not doctors. You're talking about something around McDonald's, I don't know, banking. What's my statement? Where is my tab? Where is my password? Those kind of things. So what they found out, the reason it's so amazing is that you effectively makes every average customer service agent a great one. And the difference between them is not big. The difference that a great customer service agent has an open mind. They literally have spreadsheet, Charlie, on their screen, what to say to people when they're upset, what to say to people when you want to upsell, cross-sell a product. They literally learn from someone, they heard someone, or from their own experience. Instead of saying cookie cutter corporate response, you're telling people, oh, I understand you're upset. I would feel exactly like you. So that's one. huge jump in customer satisfaction. And the second one, I'll just give you a hilarious story. The second one, we tend to talk in jargons, and that's where doctors come in. We talk to people, they cannot even understand what the heck you're talking about. And I always give that example. That was back to Google Translate days. In 2016, when we launched neural machine translation, we got a lot of praise because the quality jumped overnight. One of the first calls was from a dean of Harvard medical schools that wanted to talk to me about improving quality of machine translation for doctors. I'm like, oh, that's a great use case. So we scheduled to talk, and he sends me, I always laugh when I tell the story. He sends me a memo from Massachusetts Department of Public Health that talks about, please don't use Google Translate, especially in emergency rooms, because sometimes it's inaccurate, and give some examples. And one of the examples is, it's a seasonal Mexican worker in rural Massachusetts that got heart attack on the job. He was 6 years old. So he brought to the small no man's land ER in rural area. And he basically, the doctor, he's not speak, they don't speak, his wife is waiting in the, she's illiterate, she doesn't read, and she speaks only Spanish. So so the doctor comes out and talks to her through Google Translate and said, your husband had a cardiac arrest. And Google Translate translates it as, your husband's heart is in prison. So, and he tells me, you know what the problem is? It's not Google Translate, it's no translation. Doctors speak in this freaking slang that nobody understands them. Even if this person, a simple person, knew English, what the heck is cardiac arrest? Like, what does it even mean? So can you please help me to create a translation between medical English to English? This is a big deal. Like, that's to me, back to your point, that's to me the crux of where the value is, create a good story. Almost in everything, legal, financial, mortgage underwriting, you need a story. It's not only yes or no, it's a story, explanation, memo, legal memo, mortgage underwriting memo, etc. This memo, if ChatGPT helps you with that, that's a huge value creation. And people probably will be more forgiving on some occasional mistakes. So that's to me like the crux of it.
I love it.
Yeah, given all of this, Barak, where do you see kind of, I mean, this clearly has promises and kind of pitfalls.
Yes.
As with what I'm learning from this, Barak, I'm shocked to hear that ChatGPT, I cannot just download this and then, you know,
problem.
If I'm a CEO, I can just fire everybody else and just, you know, report to the street how well I'm doing. So the question is, what's kind of, what do you see coming? I mean, where, I think Gartner says it is already peaked, right? Now we are in the whatever trough of disillusionment.
Yeah.
Or whatever the hype cycle is.
Yes.
So what's kind of in your crystal ball? What do you see?
Yeah. So again, I'm a product person. I'm not an investment person. So talking about hype cycles is to me like it's less important. I'm like, what products will catch up in less 3 to 5 years? I call it short term, right? So using my framework, I identified 4 big buckets of use cases. The first one, I mentioned it already, entertainment use case, music, movie scripts, books, visual effects, as I said, technically perfect use case for generative AI. No right or wrong answer. It's all subjective. Huge potential for creativity. I think it's happening. I don't understand the space. I wrote an article about it in partnership with somebody who is in the industry. My only concern about the space, that's not the space I want to play in. A lot of things are dependent on dynamics of this industry. It's highly litigious, very focused on copyright, etc. So that's one use case, clearly, that is happening. The second one that I'm very excited, actually, is the next 2. The first one, I call them, and generally speaking, customer-facing interactions, like customer service, tech support, sales marketing. I would actually make a very bold statement that any company that has a sizable customer base that they interact frequently must connect all their internal data sources to be served through LLMs. Mm-hmm. If they do that, they will have a leg up. If they don't do that, I think they're in a huge risk of being disrupted by either their competition or newcomers. Think about it. They could deliver better level of service, as I said, better customer satisfaction, potentially with 50, 60% reduction in cost, because what I said. It's not easy to do. You need to reorganize your process, but you have to do it. Otherwise, you'll be disrupted. The next one, so that's to me, customer-facing interactions, very exciting space. That's one of the areas without going too much, I'm working on.
And you're still recommending that, given the cardiac arrest and the heart in prison?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm saying, is that. Let me give you an example. I was explaining to my kids financial literacy. He's 10-year-old. I tried to explain it when completely he could not understand whatever. I asked ChatGPT, explain it to 10-year-old. Oh my God, it was so engaging. The same thing. It's just you literally say to people, hey, this is a senior citizen. You need to explain to them medical, legal, banking, etc. I think it's amazing use case, right?
Yeah, this is the difference between the earlier versions of Google Translate and the sophistication of, you know, a model trained with however many billions of parameters we're up to.
Yes. Well, here it's even more, because in Google Translate I have one translation, even though we could do more. But here you're basically saying, effectively translate it from you know, professional English to simple English. So just to continue my list, there's two more. One is very related to customer service interaction, but it's more than that. It's what I call coding and software development. The reason this use case is very good is that LLMs are very good. The more structured the language, the better. But unfortunately, human languages are not structured. Human languages are evolved over thousands of years. They have exceptions, exceptions to exceptions, rules, exceptions to the rules, exceptions to exceptions, etc. Coding language is very structured, so it's way easier to do. Still need to validate. It's still a copilot, but it's way easier. And finally, the last use case that I think it's a great use case is education, and especially professional certification. There is a reason why LLMs is so good in passing low bar exam, medical exam, biology exams with flying colors, because LLMs is actually great in choosing one answer out of closed answer sections. 4 answers that are very nuanced. LLMs is amazing. I mentioned to you what we did in Google search. That was a big jump in quality that transform-based technology, BERT, could understand the nuances in a question way better. So the moment you're talking about choose out of 4 questions, by the way, human brain sucks at it, because nuances, human brain is amazing in big picture, really amazing, like amazing machine with very little computing power, so to speak. With very little energy, we can process insane amount of information. But the way we do it, we focus on big picture. We suck at details. Closed answers are usually details. It's very nuanced differences between this legal precedent and that legal precedent. That's why I think legal exam, professional certification exam, networking exam, security exams, if it's closed answer, it's a very good field for LLMs. There's multiple things you can do. You can teach about it. You can check the exam, you can compose exams, etc. Very interesting space as well. So that's kind of on a high level 4 very big areas that I predict will be disrupted in the short term. I'm particularly very excited and frankly working on combination of customer-facing interactions and coding/software development. That excites me the most.
Barak, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that's a great place to wrap up. And I think we're probably going to have you back to dive into where things are about a year from now, because it feels to me like your opinions may have changed. You know, the world is moving so fast. There will probably be a whole nother set of, you know, of things that you're thinking about at that point.
Absolutely.
But I love your clarity around where things are headed and how it all fits together. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to all the listeners for tuning in.
Perfect. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to chatting more.
All right. Till next time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Welcome to the Machine.
To join the conversation, visit us on welcometothemachine-ai.com.
Special thanks to Spencer Stewart, the Return on AI Institute, and our fantastic production team, Trey, Jojo, and John, for helping bring WTTM to life.
Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
See you next time.